Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and iPhone battery health is something that I see in the comments more and more every time there's an iOS update. People are concerned that the update will degrade battery health, and so I wanted to explain how that's not true, what battery health is, and how it actually works overall, and then I'll show you the usage graph and explain that a little bit, because that can be a bit confusing as well. Now, the first thing is battery health. iPhone battery health is simply a measurement of the overall capacity and health over time of the battery inside the phone, a physical measurement of the battery capacity. So for an example, I'll use my iPhone 11 Pro Max that I have here, and internally it has a 3,969 milliamp hour battery. And to just make this a little bit easier, I'm going to say it has a 4,000 milliamp hour battery. So I'm just rounding to make the math a little bit easier. Now, as far as the battery capacity is concerned, when you purchase a new iPhone, if it's an 11 Pro Max, you'll have about 4,000 milliamp hours. After using it, plugging it in and charging it, then using the phone and discharging the battery and then charging it back up, what you're doing is called cycling the battery. Every time you cycle a battery, the physical battery itself degrades. Now, a full cycle constitutes as 100% battery drainage and recharge. So if one day you drain it down to, say, 50%, then you charge it back up to 100, that's half a cycle. Then the next day you do the same thing, 50% down, back up to 100, that's another cycle. That would constitute as one full cycle. So as you cycle the battery over and over and over, whether that be charged to 80% or discharged to 40%, that's still part of a cycle. And as you do that more and more, those cycles will degrade the battery. So after 2 years, Apple says you should have about 80% of your battery health left. So what that means, to give you an example, is if the iPhone 11 Pro Max had 4,000 milliamp hours, it would now have 3,200 milliamp hour capacity. Or to put it in terms of an automobile, in a car, maybe you have a 10-gallon fuel tank. After 2 years, it could be down to 8 gallons, and you would only be able to handle 8 gallons of fuel and no more. That's how batteries work and how they degrade over time. So as they degrade, there's nothing you can do as far as bringing it back up to 100% without replacing the physical battery itself. So what happens is every time you install an iOS update, your phone says, what was the maximum capacity originally and what is it now? And so it says originally it was 4,000 milliamp hours, now it's 3,200, so it would give me an 80% here. That's what it's actually measuring every time. And every time you install an update, it's just simply checking what the maximum was when it was new versus what it is now, and giving you a percentage number based on that. And over time, this will continue to go down, and it will stabilize around 80 or 70% and stay there for quite some time. But over time, you will need to replace the battery if you continue to use the same phone. So the iOS updates do not degrade the battery health, they're simply remeasuring it. And so, for example, on my iPhone 6s Plus that I have here, I'm down to 85%. And while it still is at 85%, it's still performing well enough to actually use it. You'll see it says peak performance capability. Your battery is currently supporting normal peak power performance. And what that means is as your phone actually degrades with the battery does not have the ability to push out the full amount of power that it once could. So if it's low enough that it can't do that, it will then tell you that peak performance is degraded and it's time to replace your battery, because the actual phone will slow down at that point. Otherwise, if it didn't slow down, it would just fully reboot. And this is true on Android phones. It's true on any phone with a lithium-ion battery, or any battery for that matter. So batteries just degrade, and until someone comes up with better battery chemistry that doesn't degrade over time, that's what we're dealing with. Now, as far as the usage over time, this is where it's a little bit confusing. Apple changed this a few versions ago, and just to help you understand how this works a little bit better, since I get some questions about that, you'll see over the last 24 hours, I've had 2 hours of screen on time, 1 hour and 21 minutes of screen off time. However, this is also measuring screen on time while the phone is plugged in and charging. So you can see from here to here, it actually discharged the battery. Then you've got this little lightning bolt. It charged the battery. This is when I went to bed. I put it on a wireless charger. It charged it. Then it gets a little bit lighter as far as the graph goes. And that's where it was discharging again. Then it's darker again. That's when I put it in my car to drive to my office. And then Then I put it on a wireless charger in the car, and then again, it's discharging right now. And that's how that's measured over 24 hours. So you could potentially have 4 hours or 24 hours of screen on time if you left the screen on the entire time, even though it's plugged in. So it doesn't technically measure the way it's actually using the battery. But if you leave your phone off a charger the entire time, you'll see over the last 10 days, it will show you what you've actually used. Now, if it's not off the charger, this will include on the charger time. So just keep that in mind. So yesterday, for example, I had 3 hours and 10 minutes of screen on time, 1 hour and 36 minutes of screen off time, and you can see what actually used the battery. This was unplugged during that time, and I know that because I left it unplugged, but I did not get that great a battery life. So the top graph here will actually show you your battery usage. So 0 to 100%. I used about 45% of my battery to get the screen on and screen off time that I did. So it varies depending on day to day. If I go to another day, you'll see 4 hours and 45 minutes of screen on time, 2 hours and 49 minutes of screen off time. I used a little over 50% of my battery that day. Depending on the day, how you used your phone, how your cell phone signal was, whether or not you used Wi-Fi, will make these numbers vary greatly. And so battery usage is not straightforward as much as you might think. I would really like to see Apple say, this is the amount of time it was on battery, this is the amount of time it was charged or being plugged in, and then we would have a more accurate measure, and we could give you a finite number of what's actually being used versus what's charge time. So right now, it's a little hard to calculate, but you can get an idea as long as you know for a fact that it was off the charger. So this day, I used 1 hour and 41 minutes of screen on time, 53 minutes of screen off time, but I only used a quarter of the battery, or 25% or so. Now, when I always say in a video that if I times this by 4, I can give you a general idea, well, 1 hour and 41 minutes of screen on time, 53 minutes of screen off time. In that time that I used 1 hour and 41 minutes, I used about a quarter of the battery. So times 4, I'm going 25, 50, 75, 100. And that's all I'm doing is timesing that by 4. So we'd get about 8 hours of screen on time with this particular update or this particular day. But day to day, this will vary greatly. Whether or not I'm using Twitter, whether or not I'm using YouTube or playing a game, it's going to make that change dramatically depending on what I'm doing. So hopefully that helps you understand this a little bit better. But I would really love for Apple to actually update this and say, here's how much power you used in this day on battery. Here's how much the screen was on when you weren't on battery, but you were plugged in instead. So that would be a much more accurate measurement and a more finite understanding of what's actually going on as far as battery usage. But let me know what you use as far as battery in the comments below. I would love to hear what your battery health is, what your usage is, and what you're experiencing on not only new phones, but older phones such as the 6S Plus or even older. I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments below. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course, I'll link it in the description below. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.